Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Project Management Paradise podcast, your passport to project success. I'm your host, Aaron Murphy, and today I'm joined by Neal Frick to discuss the topic of the power of empathy in leadership. Neal is a leadership guru and author with a special expertise and insight into the empathy in leadership. Neal, thank you so much for being on the podcast. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you so much for being on the podcast. To get things started, so for people who may not know you, can you tell us about yourself and your background, and how did you end up mentoring leaders?
Sure. So I started in talent acquisition and recruiting for the majority of the first 15, 20 years of my career. I was primarily focused on recruiting IT professionals and in various HR roles, and then moved into operations leadership and then ultimately into executive leadership. And mentoring for me was kind of monkey see, monkey do situation. I was mentored by a lot of incredible leaders throughout the years, also mentored by some not so incredible leaders. And, as my career progressed, I really wanted to give back and do what had been done for me. And that was kind of a just natural progression, I guess, for me of my way of kind of paying it forward.
That's amazing. I suppose you have to take the good with the bad when it comes to having managers or leaders and mentors. And it's great that you're looking to or have implemented this into your career, obviously, starting from recruitment. So I'd imagine you'd have to have been from the start good at interacting people. And I suppose those skills then made sense to be mentoring leadership, people who need to have these skills.
Yeah, in a way, recruiters are in an interesting position where they have to sort of work with the people who are hiring to mentor them about how do you interview, how do you really identify whether or not someone's qualified. And you're also working with people who need a job to help them figure out what's important to them and what is really going to make, substantive changes in their lives. So it's funny, it's not a traditional path into executive leadership by any means, but I think it gives you a lot of the soft skills that really successful leaders need.
Oh, absolutely. And in your own words, can you define what is empathetic leadership?
Absolutely. So empathy is kind of it's a word that has a lot of different definitions depending on who you ask. For me, when we wrote the book, we were looking at empathetic leadership as the ability to understand another person's emotional state, where they're coming from, what their triggers are, what their indicators are, and then kind of removing yourself from that emotionality and making decisions based on the context of the whole situation. Empathy is really the ability to relate to someone and see where they're coming from.
That's really interesting. I suppose a lot of people would be trying to like nearly listen rather than take in the information. So for empathetic leadership, it's been able to take in that information, been able to define what's happening and to do it in a correct process. Would that be right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people look at for example, if you have an employee that is having a performance issue, you look at corrective behaviors to like in the moment, and that is a great way to do things. But understanding the why of okay, why is this person underperforming? What do they need? Where is it coming from? It's taking a step further and interacting with that person on a more interpersonal basis and then making a decision or moving forward from there. So it's a thing that a lot of leaders do naturally, frankly, but I think a lot of leaders also are trained to respond to a situation and not kind of do the sleuthing necessary to understand why the situation is there in the first place.
Absolutely. So it's taking that step back to get that perspective of what is exactly the problem rather than just like, oh, this is the problem and let's jump to a corrective measure.
Right, exactly.
Amazing. And in just to lead into the next question, what is the common misconception or misapplication when it comes to empathetic leadership?
I think a lot of people see empathetic leadership similar, or they confuse empathy and sympathy, right? They think that empathy means you're making decisions about a situation based on how you feel about an individual. Oh, this person is having a really hard time, so we're going to ignore this bad behavior that they're doing. And that's really not the case. It's understanding the cause of the bad behavior, but then it's making holistic decisions that are in the interest of the organization. And the example that I use the most frequently is, if you're running a team and 7 of the 8 people on the team are carrying the weight and one person isn't, and that person's going through a really hard time at home. It's not fair to the team and it's not empathetic to the team to let that person kind of slide. What is fair and empathetic is to figure out a solution that works for everybody. So maybe it's that person takes time off, or that person has a different role for a period of time. They take on less complex tasks from someone else. Their role shifts. They move to a different team. It doesn't have to result in corrective action or termination, but it's not about, oh, I feel sorry for this person, so therefore I'm going to do something that impacts negatively the entire organization. So I think a lot of people see empathy as sort of a soft touch, and that's really not what it is. It's about information gathering and context more so than it is about the emotionality behind something.
That's really interesting. And in your opinion, what are the 3 to 4 keys to successful empathetic leadership?
That's a great question. I think the first one is transparency. It's really important that you foster an environment where people feel like they can be honest with you and where you're honest with them, because that really builds trust. And trust is something that you have to have with your team, with your customers, with whoever you are interacting with, so that they will be willing to have those conversations and kind of go down that path with you. Because if you're not building that trust and you're not transparent, you're absolutely not going to get a positive response. And then, you're not going to be able to make those decisions. And I would say, I guess, trust is probably the another thing that is obviously very important. And then listening, as silly as it seems, give people space to have those conversations with you. Understand that you may not agree with where they're coming from. You may not necessarily even care what they're going through because you have a business to run. But it is very, very important to understand where someone is at in their situation, so that you can begin to help shape an appropriate response, and then ultimately do something that will, if somebody's going through something tough and you help them through it in whatever way you can, you've built loyalty. You've got an employee that is going to work hard for you. You're also helping craft a new leader, somebody who is going to take that and then pass it down to the next generation of leaders. So I think that's really critically important. And then the last thing I would say is apply logic in your decision making process. Do not allow yourself to get too over emotional. It is very easy for empathy to turn into sympathy. And you have to have really specific and rigid boundaries so that you are not allowing emotions to cloud your judgment and your thinking when you're making decisions based on where someone is in their situation.
That's amazing. And I suppose key 1 and 2, trust and listening, they would go hand in hand. And then obviously using that information that you've compiled, you'll be able to help your decision making for, as you said, for key 3.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. And you were saying that it's nearly like a fine line with empathy and sympathy. Would that be a common pitfall when it comes to empathetic leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. I fell into it. I've certainly fallen into it throughout my career as well. I had a friend who worked for me directly for about 5 years, and really cared about the guy. He had been going through a really difficult time. The way his kind of difficulty impacted his work was a lot of kind of bad behaviors. He was not the kindest person to his team members. He was stirring up some trouble. It was all coming from kind of a hurt place and a very difficult, dark time that he was going through. But because of my kind of emotional connection, I allowed that behavior to go on for way too long, and it's a huge regret of mine. Ultimately, it led to him no longer being with the organization, and eventually, I kind of made the right call, but it did some damage to my team along the way, and it was a lesson I had to learn in how you have to set rigid boundaries when you are an empathetic leader, because it's easy to get overwhelmed if you're a people person and you care. It's easy to get overwhelmed by someone's emotional situation. And it's easy to feel bad for them and to want to do things to help them. But you have to be able to take a step back and not let your decisions be ruled by emotionality. Because what you're going to end up doing is not only hurting the organization and the rest of the team, but you're actually not doing them any favors, because you're kind of coddling them through a situation. And you have to make sure that you're protecting everyone in the team and the organization, and you can't let one person's situation rule all of that decision making.
Absolutely. You have to put the interests of the team and the organization first, I'd imagine. And as hard as it is, like, you do have to distinguish as you said yourself, empathy from sympathy.
Absolutely.
And I suppose this is probably the $1 million question, but how do you ensure a return of investment when it comes to empathetic leadership?
Sure. There's a couple of key ways to look at the ROI of empathy. One is effort and productivity, right? So if you have a team and you are able to measure productivity, and not everyone, has teams where it's as easy to measure productivity, but you will see a difference in people's kind of sweat equity within an organization if they feel like they are part of an empathetic leadership team. There have been a lot of studies done around, especially post COVID and sort of after the Great Resignation, and everybody's kind of realization that jobs need people more than people need jobs. There are a lot more openings out there, and it's very obviously country and location dependent. But on the whole, people have a lot of options, and organizations are finding it difficult to staff positions when their culture is not supportive of an employee. And I think that is largely because people are not willing to put in a lot of effort for an organization that they do not feel like they are connected to in some way or is going to take care of them. So there's a clear indicator from a productivity standpoint that empathetic leadership style will bring out the best in individuals. And then from a customer standpoint, from a marketing standpoint, from a sales standpoint, it goes back to kind of the customer hero story, this idea that if I'm a consumer and I want a product that is going to solve a problem for me, I want to be able to see my problem reflected, and then I want to see how my problem is solved. And to really understand what your consumer needs, you have to listen to them. You have to put yourself in their shoes. You have to understand where they're coming from. And then you can craft your sales pitch, your marketing pitch around how you're solving that individual's problem and making their life better. And that is an offshoot of empathetic leadership. That's empathetic sales and marketing. There's a tool used for software developers, user experience and user interface designers called empathy mapping, where they will talk to their end customer and understand what they need from their software interface. What do they need it to look like? How does it feel? How does it operate? They then use that to help guide the development process. That is incredibly applicable to a sales and marketing process. It's incredibly applicable to interfacing with consumers. Understanding where your consumer is at and how to solve their problems is the quickest way to see sales increase.
100%. I agree with that. It ties back to your keys to success for empathetic leadership. It has to be the trust and listening. So being able to apply that, it just really does show like that it will bring a return of investment.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think we did a lot of research as we were writing the book, and more studies are being done now about kind of emotional intelligence and how that impacts business. And for so long, that kind of traditional authoritarian, you do it my way, this is how it works, was kind of the predominant philosophy. And, it worked in a time when work was scarce and people didn't know what options they have. With the interconnectivity of our world, with the amount of flexibility that post-COVID telework has brought, that approach just doesn't work anymore. And we have to find a new way to impact the workplace and bring people back to the table in a positive way so that they want to do good things for your organization.
Absolutely. And as you said, company culture really does help keep on this talent rather than, as you said, them leaving, because there's so many opportunities with the remote working now. So absolutely, having that trust there is something. Even where I work in Cora, company culture, it comes straight from our leadership. They are the embodiment of it, and that keeps the talent here in the company.
Yeah, and I mean, it's so much more expensive these days to replace someone than it is to keep someone. And you don't even necessarily need to throw money at people. In some cases, you do. In some cases, people need to be paid more. But in a lot of cases, you just need to make your organization flexible enough to be able to solve a problem for an individual employee. And that's one of the wonderful things about kind of this more flexible mindset now, is that we have the ability to, people who couldn't come into an office every day because of their physical limitations, their personal situation, now have the ability responsibility to contribute their incredible work and their incredible worldview at the same level as everyone else. And as difficult as it is for some traditional thinking leadership to get it, I think they will start to see, as the rest of us kind of step up to the plate, what it looks like when an organization has that kind of diversity. It's a beautiful thing to witness, and I'm excited about where kind of the future of the workplace is going.
Absolutely. The future is bright in that regard. And what surprises you most, or might surprise our listeners, about the field of empathetic leadership?
Honestly, probably how easy it is. It's really not complicated. It's just taking an extra couple of steps to ask a few questions. More often than not, customers want to tell you how to solve their problem because they're looking for a solution. Employees want to tell you what they need because they need it and they want to continue to work for you and they want to figure out a way to contribute. Most people, and not all, but most people want to be productive and they want to be successful. And the people that don't, you're never going to change them. And that's something that you can also discover through these conversations. It's really not complicated. It feels like when we wrote the book, I kind of felt like, well, this could be like 3 pages long. It's really not that complicated. Our editors wouldn't let us go that short, but we really did just. It's a core concept of understand somebody else, understand where they're coming from. We do it in our personal lives every day. With slight modification, you can bring it to your professional life, and it makes a huge impact. You just have to be mindful and thoughtful about it when you talk to someone, and then follow through on what you promise and what you say that you're going to deliver.
That's amazing. And it's so true as well. And the final question I have for you today is, what's the most important piece of advice you've received and how has it helped you in your career?
I've received a lot of good advice over the years. When I took over the company that I'm running now as CEO, the outgoing CEO, I asked her, what's the biggest lesson that you learned in your time? And she told me not to hesitate in making the hard decisions. Don't wait to have the hard conversation because it's tough. Don't wait to put somebody on a performance improvement plan if they need it. Don't hesitate to have a challenging conversation and fire a customer if you need to. Don't let the fear of the what if around that tough situation paralyze you. And I think it's been a lesson that I learned over and over again. I mentioned that situation with the employee that had gone through a tough time and was having some real challenges. From my perspective, the hardest conversations that you have are also usually the most important ones for you as a person, for your organization, and for your employees. And waiting to make those calls serves no one. It's very easy when you're a leader to lean into the things that you're good at and that you're comfortable in and stay within your comfort zone, because it's really hard to have those challenging conversations. Nobody wants to fire somebody. Nobody wants to put somebody on a PIP. But it is the only way to kind of keep your organization moving. The longer that you delay, the more damage you end up doing.
Wow, that's so true. And I suppose the first thing that came to my mind hearing that is it's growth through discomfort.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's transformation through discomfort, right? It's this idea that if you don't lean in and have those tough conversations, and especially if you're an empathetic person and you want to be an empathetic leader, the natural offshoot of that is that you're going to feel something as a result of these dealings that you have with employees. It did not feel good to let that individual who was having that hard time go. We tried everything beforehand. We tried different ways of solving the problem. And the end result was that the person transitioned out of the organization. It was tough, but it was important to the growth of the organization. And it helped me as a leader get sharper, get more decisive, move faster. We're no one really is an expert at leadership. You kind of can't be, because you have to change and modulate your leadership style for anyone that you work with. So the more that you interact with people, the more that you execute and do not hesitate, the better leader you will become.
Neal, that's an amazing answer. And it's so true as well. I suppose to be an expert in something, you have to be constantly evolving and constantly exercising it, nearly like a muscle, to get better at it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the thing about exercising that muscle over and over again is because people are so different. You're never going to experience leading someone in the same way that you did previously. You'll have things that'll inform your decision making and inform how you lead someone, but because people are so vastly and wildly different, you never really are an expert at leading that specific individual. So if you're not constantly innovating, constantly coming up with new ways to look at situations, constantly changing and modulating the way that you move forward, you're going to end up getting stuck, and you're not going to be as flexible and able to lead groups of people in the individualistic way that you need to. So it really is important to kind of keep searching out new ways to do things. Listen to leaders who are doing things differently than you and take what you think resonates and apply that to the way that you lead, and then throw the rest away, but constantly be looking for that next step.
Absolutely. It's just made me think of the book Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon, constantly taking ideas from everyone else and applying it to your unique style.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's incredibly powerful. I would say that my leadership style, if you broke it down, is an amalgamation of 30 people who I saw doing it and thought, oh, that's really successful. That's really effective. I've noticed throughout my career saying things or doing things and actually being able to think, oh, that was Jennifer, or that was this person, or that was this person. That influence has now come through. And I think, good leaders, good artists, good creators in general do a little bit of that. And then put it through your own worldview, put your lens on it, put your special sauce on it, and then it becomes something that one day someone will look back and say, oh, that's, that came from this person.
Absolutely. They'll look back and be like, that was Neal's style of leadership. And then they'll, once they distill it down, they'll see the other 30 people that influenced you throughout your career.
Right.
Neal, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really enjoyed this. It was really informative and some great takeaways from the whole conversation. The last thing I want to ask you, if anyone would like to reach out to you, where would be the best place to do this? And if anyone wanted to pick up a copy of your book, where can they do so?
Certainly. So I am on Medium at neal.frick. I write articles on there. I'm also accessible. I'm also on Instagram at the Anxious CEO 1, I believe, because the Anxious CEO was taken. I'm still mad about it. But I talk about mental health and leadership. I talk about empathetic leadership. And then the book is available, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, basically anywhere books are sold. Probably not at your local bookstore. We are not that big yet, but hopefully one day.
One day, absolutely. Neal, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks so much, Aaron. You have a great one.